Okay, we'll start with this iconic car, which was designed and built in 1906. It's the Silver Ghost by Rolls-Royce, one of the most famous Rolls-Royce models ever built. And this car was actually designed and built in our city, which is called Hume. And it is actually a small city or a neighborhood in a much larger metropolis. We'll be discussing both of them and their relationships today. So this is 1820, and we are looking, well, towards our city. Our city is in the distance. You can see some buildings and towers at the very far away. And what we see is basically a pastoral landscape, fields, trees, a meandering river, and people enjoying in the front the sun and the view and nature. And now we have another painting from the almost exact location, but after a couple of years, now we are in 1857, and you can recognize the trees at the left and also the meandering river just in front of the trees. And now the view is completely changed. What we see is industrialization or effects of industrialization on a city. Okay, now we'll start looking at our aerial photographs, and we see, well, obviously a very large body of water, sea. From this color we can imagine it's rather deep. And also right at the center we can recognize a river which is meandering towards our city. And also we can notice a straight line also connecting uh, the city with the mouth of the river. What do you think? This is certainly a human-made element. And we can recognize from this photograph a huge built-up area. So this must be a very big city indeed. And also, right to the left, we also feel some human-made elements, also city-like features. And we can imagine that this is another city, maybe a port city. Now we are focusing towards the city we are interested in. And from this distance, we see, first of all, this the river, of course, it's there. The built-up area to our right, it's very recognizable. And also we see that um, very straight line, the human-made, whatever it is. And we also recognize our red circles, some industrial areas, huge areas which have white flat roofs, and they must be industrial areas. So and there it's actually all around and inside our city. So this must be an industrial city actually we are looking at. And this straight line is actually a channel connecting our city to the sea, and we will see that it is actually extremely important. Now we are focusing further into our city, and at the center, a little bit towards right, we see our city center, and to the left, this huge area is an industrial area, and look at the dimensions, it's even larger than the city center. So this is obviously an industrial city, and actually it is this is indeed maybe the first industrial city in the whole world, and it is Manchester. Now we are focusing further into the city center, and we see first of all towards left of the center some rivers, and also we see a lot of highways. This is kind of interesting. We have never seen that before in any of our cities. So right at the center we see a sort of highway. So maybe this would show that our city is actually spread out quite a bit, which needs connection through those highways. Beyond that, we don't recognize necessarily any sort of organization in the city center. It almost feels like some of the organically developed cities we have seen before. and the buildings feel from this distance as if they are rather modern buildings, rather new buildings. Although the texture is almost organic, no recognizable street pattern indicating some sort of planning, the buildings are very new. When we look further into our city, it's maybe a little bit more evident. Okay, now a little bit background information. So once more, Manchester was the first industrial city in the world. Um, and why was it Manchester, but let's say not any other city in the world which industrialized? Why was Manchester so successful in implementing all these new technologies? Um, so this is the background information we'll discuss a little bit. So Manchester was already a cotton weaving center in 18th century, and it's a damp climate. There are rivers, there are marshlands, and it's also rather wet. It rains all the time. It was probably rather fit for weaving technology because the different fibers can stick to each other in a better fashion in a damp environment. So maybe this was one of the reasons. And at that time, in early 18th century, weaving was done in houses by individuals or families, and then bought by traders who would distribute the finished product to wherever they were selling their goods. And the first revolution, we are not industrializing yet, but the first revolution in cotton or textile technology was the fly shuttle, it is actually this little thing, which was invented by John Kay in 1733. So, and this fly shuttle made everything much faster. So weaving became much faster. So a person could weave more fabric in one day or in any given amount of time. And there was a lot of social reaction towards that, but we won't be talking about this. Maybe you can look it up for yourself. And second very important invention is by James Hargreaves, which happened in 1764, and this is called the spinning jenny. And this is a further improvement to the existing weaving technology, and it sped up things even further. So it was even more, even easier or faster. The whole system was faster and producing more fabric. The next technology invented in the way leading to industrialization was the water frame, invented by Richard Arkwright in 1768. And this is again a textile weaving frame, not necessarily so much different than the spinning jenny, but Arkwright's invention was actually about using water energy to run this frame. So instead of the human power by the pedals or by hand, now this frame is some sort of automatic frame which runs on energy that comes from water, which comes from the river. And Manchester has plenty of rivers which have very fast waters. Now, a big change occurs. Until almost this moment in time, as I told before, weaving was done in houses by families or individuals. Now, Richard Arkwright builds the first factories because you cannot have water frames anywhere. You need running water, and you need a lot of running water. And he has built these factories with a lot of water frames in them just next to the rivers. And almost immediately after that, James Watt, you know him, in 1781 optimizes the steam engine. He's not the inventor of the steam engine, but he optimizes the usage. And almost immediately, steam engines are being used in textile industry. And again, it is our previous friend Richard Arkwright who builds the first steam-driven textile mill in Manchester in 1782. And this is the beginning of industrialization. Not only of textiles, but this is the beginning of industrial revolution. We have steam engines which run some machines. And the production, of course, explodes. And this is the James Watt steam engine actually. This was Manchester's economic potentials, let's say, to become one of the first industrial cities in the world. And now we'll look at the logistics potentials of Manchester's to again to explain why Manchester was one of the earliest cities which industrialized so quickly and efficiently. Actually, it was a transportation hub, or had the potential of being a transportation hub. At that time, in early 18th century, roads are not highways. You cannot really transport goods or raw materials through roads. It's impossible. But you could use sea ships in rivers to transport that. And Manchester was very lucky because of its location. It was next to a number of rivers, deep and navigable rivers. And through these rivers, coal could be brought in to be used in engines later after industrial revolution, but also even before that, using these rivers and channels, we'll see in a moment, raw goods could come in like cotton and wool, and finished products like textiles could be transported outside and sold to the different parts of the world. So the very first thing which was done in Manchester to improve the transportation conditions was to make rivers Mersey and Irwell, the two rivers which merge actually right at the center of Manchester, to make Mersey and Irwell rivers navigable. So actually to control the speed of flow in the rivers, and this is done in 1734, and it is done through some locks. We can discuss that later. Actually, locks are barriers put into the river to control the flow of the river. And the second important engineering feat, which made transportation much more efficient in Manchester and created actually a transportation network, is the construction of canals. The first one is the Bridgewater Canal, opened in 1761, that connected the southern parts of Manchester with the city center. And the second one is the Rochdale Canal, opened in 1804, which connected the northern parts of Manchester with the city center. And the last one is from 1885, actually the Manchester Ship Canal, and this was the straight line that connects the city center of Manchester to the sea, and in a way may turned the city center into a port and a transportation hub. And also during 19th century, all these different canals were connected into each other, creating a transportation network. And this is a list of Manchester population. We see how the population has been jumping from 1821. The city has a population of only a little bit higher than 500,000, and within 30 years, in 1851, the population has doubled. It has more than 1 million people, and then in another 30 years or 40 years, population doubles again, and when Manchester nears 20th century, it has more than 2 million people. So it's a real metropolis. And you can imagine, as we had discussed in London, the results of such a huge population increase. And Hume was one of the areas where all these new people moving in Manchester, basically the laborers, workers working in textile industry, were inhabited. It is Hume. And in 1830, this is a little image. At the very background, to the left, you can see Manchester and the main cathedral and its spire. And Hume was a pastoral rural area just outside Manchester. But very quickly, beginning in 1840, 1850, it became worker suburb of Manchester. And this is an early map, 17th century map of Manchester, showing just the city center, very, very small town at that time. And this is early 19th century map of Manchester. So we see the main streets. Again, we are looking at city center. We see the main streets. It's a very small town at that moment. Something it has a population of 200, 300,000 at that time. And even at that time, we have discussed that Manchester was already a center of textiles. And we can see the Bridgewater Canal and also the Rochdale Canal. So these two canals are already there to connect different parts of the city with each other, and also to bring in goods, raw materials, and bring out finished products, textiles out of the city. And they are not connected yet. Later in 19th century, the two canals are connected. And in this map, Hume doesn't exist now because Hume is just on the other side of Bridgewater Canal, but it's so small, it's not even a village, so it doesn't get in our map. But in our next map, which is from 1843, Hume is clearly visible, and now we still see the city center with the same road pattern as the previous map. Just a reminder, let's look at it again. And right at the end of this main street going south, we have Hume, and Hume is developing just in the periphery of Manchester. And this is the population of Hume in beginning of 19th century. It's small, well, medium-sized, let's say, village. It has 1,600 people. And in 1851, it has more than 50,000 people. And in 1871, it has already 74,000 people. So it becomes a city of its own. And certainly, all the housing, early housing, is built very quickly and very, very cheaply, mostly by the factories themselves. And immediately it's a slum area. And this is a late 19th century news clip from a newspaper, and it talks about an unfashionable slum in Manchester. And this is actually our Hume. It's congested, it's dirty, quality of life is bad, there is no hygiene, and so on. The typical 19th century slum area in an industrial city. And we had also discussed those when we were talking about London. Most of housing stock in Hume was consisting of back-to-back houses. So these houses don't have backyards, meaning they don't have their own toilets or little gardens, but they share those facilities with their neighbors. So these are some back-to-back houses and also some other sort of terrace houses in Hume. So it's very, very dense, as we can see. And this is now 20th century. Probably these photographs are from 1950s or 1960s. And at that time, the textile industry has already collapsed. So textile industry almost completely collapses after 1950s. And all these people in Hume don't have jobs anymore because of the, well, change in economic conditions and collapse of textile industry. So the earlier slum, the conditions in the slum area, which were already dense and not necessarily very, very good, worsens in 1980s and 1950s and 1960s. So these photographs are from 1950s and 1960s. Okay, at the top we see an overall view of Hume, and at the bottom we just see a detail from a street corner. Now we are coming to the end of our little video, and this is your question for this week. We are now in 1960s. Industry is, well, almost non-existent. I mean, textile industry. So all these people living in Hume, still more or less 70,000 people, have very, very few jobs. So they don't have their jobs anymore. And these houses, which were built in earlier 19th century, are getting old, which were not wonderful and strong and efficient structures anyhow. So they were already badly built. And something needs to be done. And the city of Manchester and the city of Hume wants to improve the conditions living conditions of its citizens. And now you are an architect involved in the development of a new housing scheme for Hume. The city municipality wants to redesign the area overall in order to improve the living conditions of all its inhabitants of Hume. And you need to propose a design for this area. Of course, you're not going to design a project, but make a list of design principles of the new of your design, of your new neighborhood design, and also make some sketches. So, what would you change, and what would be the important characteristics of your new design? To aid your study, you will find a map of Hume from 1930s, I think, from 20th century in Blackboard. You can also use that as reference.